everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Card Talk, a podcast where we spend a little bit of time talking about cards from Lord of the Rings, the card game. I'm your host, Dave Walsh.
And I'm Grant Thompson, just along for the ride.
And today we have a very special guest. As you can see, we have the famous ElectronJon from Cardboard of the Rings. Kind of rounds out the three voice talents on the Cardboard of the Rings podcast, but there's a bunch of people that work behind the scenes. I want to make sure that they get due credit, and they also, John, just so you know, they do have an open invite anytime they want to come on the show. They're more than welcome to come on our show.
Awesome.
But let's start with you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You're part of the community. You do stuff for the community. You're obviously active in doing Cardboard of the Rings. And before we just had technical problems, you were telling all sorts of good stuff. So go ahead.
Technical problems seem to be the order of the day, both for you guys and for us.
Right.
And man, it's been a week of stuff like that. But hey guys, thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be here, and I've been looking forward to this for a while, ever since you asked me to be on. But yeah, so I have been playing this game since like July of 2015, and really I got into it from the lore side of it, just really enjoying. I mean, Tolkien is one of my favorite authors of all time. If you've listened to any of my guest spots with the Grey Company and their book club, like I'm huge into the lore side of things. So for me, getting into this game and just seeing how well it carves out its own little place in the lore a lot of times. I mean, sometimes it's a little iffy. Some of those first couple of cycles are a little iffy.
Yeah.
Like, really? But especially once we get rolling with Caleb and kind of from his cycles on, it's been really fun to explore these different parts of the world that, generally speaking, feel like they're parts of the world. So that's been a lot of fun. And I kind of went nuts when I got in. I got all the content. I think all the non-nightmare content within 6 months of getting into the game, and I still sometimes feel like I'm catching up. And so really, I kind of what's fun about being a part of Cardboard of the Rings in the Second Age is that I'm there with Chris, who's this master deck builder. I mean, probably the most prolific deck builder in the community. I'm there with Chad, who is doing, he's doing the Twitch streams all the time. He's playing all the time. And he's also quite a good deck builder too. I think he flies under a lot of people's radar for how good of a deck builder he is. And then you have me, and I get to play a little bit more of the everyman as somebody that gets this game on the table maybe 15, 20 times a year. And I do play some on Octagon more than that, but as I've gone on record before saying, I'm not huge into Octagon because I don't want to spend all of my free time in front of the same computer I spend all of my work time at. So, being self-employed, you kind of have to balance that. And so one of the things I love about this game is getting the cards out on the table. But I got two small kids, so sometimes that doesn't happen even when I want it to.
Right. Even when you get it out, sometimes the kids have other plans. Well, let me ask you, John, because I can tell from the things that you've done outside of this podcast that what is your favorite quest? Because you're a lore guy and you I love the game mechanics, and I do love the lore too, but I'm more of the gamey mechanic guy. So I'm interested to know what your favorite quest is. I may be putting you on the spot, so that's fine. We can, but
there are, it's almost any of the saga quests, honestly. And I think certainly by the time this episode airs, the episode we just recorded to COTR will have been out for a little while. So we talk a little bit about the saga quest there. And I just, the way that there are moments that happen in the game that if you want to play the game thematically, you very much can. And you can make these moments happen in your game just like you imagine them in the book. Yeah, like you find yourself getting emotionally involved with what's happening on the table, and it's really kind of amazing. So, but to narrow it down, I think front to back, Battle of Pelennor Fields might be it, just because that has, I think, the highest frequency, highest number of those moments where these lore moments that I have in my head from loving the books, I'm now seeing happen, and some of them required set up many quests in advance.
Right.
And that also, another one I really like is Tower of Cirith Ungol. Just the Watcher mechanic there was really cool, really fun, but also very reflective of that. And of course, I've talked about this before, playing whether or not it was strictly legal, playing basically epic multiplayer, but solo, like one hand on each side
Right.
of the last two quests
Uh-huh.
was just so much fun.
Right.
So, I mean, honestly, any of the saga quests, but like those that I called out are particular bright spots for me. So I'm cheating by giving you an answer that's 5 quests long.
No, that's okay.
But there you go.
You know, I noticed
Yeah.
you didn't hit like the Dream Chaser cycle when you when you're
Man, so much, well, no, but that I think would be a good example of like finding a way to tell that story. I mean, they had some really interesting real world constrictions there, in addition to the fictional constraints of what they, you know, of what's in,
right.
like what we know and what Tolkien wrote. So they, I think, did a really good job of giving us an adventure that we really wouldn't have had otherwise. And, you know, does it exactly fit in the lore? No. Are those some really fun questions? Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it scratch an itch? You know, very much so. Those are some great things. And
Right.
I mean, you can see Matt's wheels turning in that cycle as
Right.
Arkham is being developed concurrently with that cycle. So yeah, it's good time.
Let's get into this. So we've been running a contest for the past few weeks, several weeks, whatever it is now. Yeah. And similar to the one that we had with one of the other hosts of the show, Chad, where people guess the card. And we've given a couple of hints, not too many, but you know, there's been some indication there. And so at this point, I think it's only fair to our audience, a couple minutes into our show, to let them know who you pick. Now, feel free. We'll let you introduce the card and talk about it a little bit. But feel free to do whatever you want before you announce it. After, you know,
having seen the episodes from my co-hosts, you know, Chad, of course, picking Haldir, and Chris, no surprise, picking Aristor. I was like, you know, guys, I mean, those are great cards, but we know those are great cards. Yeah, I thought, you know, what about picking a card that is maybe a little more under the radar? What about picking a card that doesn't maybe have the exposure that some other cards do? This card that maybe it's never been out of your binder. Maybe it came out of the box, you looked at it, you may have even sleeved it, and then you immediately put it in the binder.
For those people looking and you see me laughing, it's the drama that ElectronJon is using to build up this card is phenomenal.
Oh,
I just have to. This is good theater, folks.
Yeah, and I'm hoping they're appreciating this.
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
doing
yeah,
this
yeah.
on the fly.
Yeah.
I have no notes for this, but yeah, I wanted to find a card that we could really give it its due, or at least give it the best chance of having its due. Because I feel like, you know, as someone who really enjoys the lore, that this character in the story, really without this character, the quest of the ring may well have failed. So that's right, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, on episode whatever number this is of Card Talk, we are talking about the spirit hero, Hobbit, Fatty Bulger.
Fatty Bulger!
Boom. Let me give you some hard truth.
Okay.
You paid as much money for Fatty Bulger as you did for Sam. Okay, so this, let me say up front, this is just an exercise in fun. I have seen, you know, the cards, like you sent me the list of the cards that you guys have already talked about, or in either episodes that are forthcoming or in previous episodes, and there's a lot of really good cards there. And so I really did want to pick one that was like, hey, what the heck? Let's pick one that is usually kind of the punching bag of the community, and see if they're really, let's see if there are enough tools out there to make this card work. And I was actually kind of surprised. I found not only some tools, but actually some decks that look pretty fun. And so we'll talk about those in a little bit. But let me say up front, this is an exercise in fun, and I'm in no way saying that Fatty is like a top tier hero with Sam, but he's got his play. And it's one of those things that, like, playing him will make you play the game a little bit differently. So if you're looking for some variety, like I said, you paid as much for him as you did for Sam, you might as well get him on the table. Fatty Bulger is a 7 threat cost spirit hero. He has 1 willpower, 1 attack, 2 defense, 3 hit points. Not bad for a hobbit. And he has the card text action. Exhaust Fatty Bulger to choose an enemy in the staging area and raise your threat by that enemy's threat. Until the end of the phase, that enemy does not contribute its threat. Limit once per round. Okay, so his mechanic is essentially distract distracting enemies, like bringing the focus on himself and raising your threat, but distracting enemies from slowing you down on the quest. Now, mechanically, he's okay, fine. He needs some pieces to make this work. But thematically, guys, this is a absolute home run. So are you guys familiar with Fatty at all in the books?
Grant would know more than I did. I just know that he was
Okay.
mentioned just very briefly. Grant, what's your experience with Fatty?
I know that he was one of the hobbits that went to Crick Hollow with Merry
Yep.
to set
Yep.
up prior to Frodo, Sam, and Pippin getting there, and that he stayed behind to let Gandalf know when Frodo and company left Crick Hollow on the morning after they arrived there. And then the Black Riders came, and he ran as fast as he could to alert the Shire to let them know that the Black Riders were about.
Nicely done.
As far as I'm aware, that is the only mention I can recall off the top of my head without diving back into the book.
Yeah, he actually shows up during the scouring at the tail end of the book. But yeah, he was a friend of Frodo's. He was about 13 years younger, so he's about the same age as Merry, plus or minus a couple of years. And you're right, he was helping Merry along with Falco to move the last of Frodo's stuff into the house in Crick Hollow. Now, Crick Hollow was in Buckland. It's at the east border of the Shire, and it's where Frodo moves to in the book as part of covering up his departure. Like he's trying to get out of the Shire as quietly as he can, and part of that is doing this massive cover up of saying, "Oh, I've run out of money. I bought this house in Crick Hollow. I'm selling my house here in Hobbiton. I'm selling Baggin to the Saxville Bagginses, and I'm moving to Crick Hollow." And so he, it's a couple days walk away from Hobbiton. Now to us, that's like that doesn't sound very far at all. But you have to remember that this is a culture where most of these people have never walked more than 20 miles away from their home in their lives. So going down to Buckland and moving into Crick Hollow is plenty far enough, even though he was originally from Buckland, plenty far enough to kind of cover his tracks from the folks in Hobbiton. So Fatty has been helping out Falco and Merry move the last of Frodo's things into Crick Hollow. And now he, in the scene that we really see him in that night in Crick Hollow, he talks about hearing stories from his nurses about the old forest, what Merry later calls old bogey stories, which is where we get that card, the old bogey stories card. But he stays behind, and he is going to keep up the illusion of Frodo being in the house while the other four leave for the old forest, because he is going to take some of Frodo's old clothes and just basically wear them around the house, be outside, do some, be getting the mail or whatever, just being seen. It probably won't hold up to too much scrutiny, but it'll hold up well enough to at least buy Frodo and the others some time to get out. And this is something that he does knowing that the Black Riders now are looking for them. That's something he learns that night in Crick Hollow. He doesn't know that before they leave for Buckland, but he finds out that night and he chooses to stay. So he stays behind, and you're right, on that night, September 30th, the ring wraiths crash the house, and Fatty manages to escape and raise the alarm. I think, what is it called, like the Horn of Buckland or something like that. Like, yeah, it's great. Like, it's just this really like dramatic scene of.
I'd love to see the card, the Horn of Buckland.
Yeah,
just to come out.
Caleb, if you're watching, please, I want a Horn of Buckland boon or something. But it manages to drive the ring wraiths off. Now they find out that the ring has left the Shire, but they manages to drive the ring wraiths off. So this is where the theme of the card is right on. He brings the threat onto himself and distracts the enemies so that the quest can continue. Pretty cool. Now, I talked about the other mention of him later in the book, in the scouring, during the occupation of the Shire by the ruffians, who were under control of Sharky, not Asterisk Sharky, the branded former lead host of Cardboard of the Rings. No, Saruman Sharky. Fatty actually leads a fight against the ruffians in kind of the northeast portion up near the hills of Scary. And he is captured and put in the lockhole. So he's put in prison and starved, so that the one line we see about him later in short describing this in fewer words than I just used was that he could no longer really be called Fatty. So he actually is a pretty, like, he's kind of a low-key hero. Like, he's not one of the big four, but the character himself plays a pretty key role. And so that's why, like, when I looked at the card, and saw what the mechanic really was and thought about how that relates to the lore, I mean, like, it's kind of great. You know, I don't know that it's the most useful ability you're going to be using every turn. The limit once per round is kind of funny to me.
Because how many times do you quest in a turn?
Yeah, and well, I mean, I guess there can be, you know,
there can be like add threat to somebody's attack or something like that. Right. I guess.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that I see why that why it does that, and this action is not actually locked to a particular phase, which is nice.
Right.
But yeah, what's funny is let me put on my earlier draft hat, my super duper lore nerd hat here.
Okay.
That other wasn't enough, because this is, you know, as I was digging into stuff, I went back and found this.
So let's clarify for the audience. When you say lore nerd, you don't mean the green cards from the game. You mean the books and stuff.
I like spirit and lore decks quite a bit. I like controlling stuff, but as a true solo player, I tend to be spirit and tactics more than anything else.
Okay.
But yeah, in an earlier draft, he actually goes with them into the old forest, and presumably would have gone on the quest, but Tolkien kind of restarts the story before he got much further than that. So that's why, like, if you're reading carefully, you'll notice that there are 5 ponies ready in the stable at Crick Hollow when the 4 hobbits depart. So the other pony would have been or was for Fatty. And that's kind of a hangover from a previous version of the story. So,
and to cover that, they just saddled it up as a pack mule.
Yep, basically. So yeah, there is Fatty Bulger. For those of you that have not read the books, that's where we get Fatty. That's where we get the card ability. And like I said, mechanically a little challenging to build around, and not like the most immediately obviously useful card. Certainly no Sam Gamgee, but just like in the story, he's got, like, the mechanic is, or the theme of it's kind of a home run, and like you can find a use for him. So maybe we should start talking about some ways to use him.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, and John, of course, you're the guest here, so you know we'll give you the floor on a lot of this. But I mean, at first, when I thought of Fatty Bulger, I was just thinking that this was a hobbit that they needed to add to it to give 3 spirit hobbits, so that you could make an all spirit hobbit deck. You know, because you had Frodo, and then you had Spirit Mary, and then you have Fatty, and then, I mean, without too deep of a dive into this, you know, I mean, Spirit Mary and Fatty kind of, you know, they kind of, they synergize. I mean, I don't even want to give it that big of a, you know, that big of a woohoo, you know, like, because you get to reduce your threat, but then you get to raise your threat using Fatty, but then you get to reduce your threat there, you know. So I guess there's some synergy there. And then with Frodo in there, it just seems like the theme in the game designers, whoever designed the Black Riders, maybe still was it Caleb doing the Black Riders?
That would have been Caleb. All the saga was Caleb.
Right. And so, you know, like, and he, you know, so there is some synergy and some stuff going on there. And then of course, because it's threat reduction, I always think spirit and threat reduction, like it's in the right sphere to get things going and doing those sorts of things. So that's where I was in my initial thoughts about Fatty. And so, Grant, what was your initial thoughts of Fatty Bulger?
Thematically appropriate, but then when I actually looked to build a deck with the hobbits, I ended up shying away from them, because compared to the abilities of Pippin and Sam and Tactics Mary, or even Spirit Mary, he just didn't seem to hit the mark with me wanting to include him in a deck.
Prior to Tom Cotton coming out, Fatty was and still is a really solid defender. Tom Cotton is a better defender, but Fatty is a very, like, for a hobbit anyway, solid defender. I have seen builds that pop Steward of Gondor on him, just so they can put Gondor and shield on him. I mean, you can do that from.
Well, that's for any hero, right?
Right. Yeah. But yeah, using him as a defender seems to be a lot more of what you use him for, because you're really at that point using him as a defender. You're also using him for the spirit access as a sort of a splash hero, and then also the Hobbit trait, so you can, you know, power up Mary if you so desire. So yeah, that's been that. Those tend to be the builds that I see for taking advantage of him as a defender.
Yeah, and I think that if you're trying to put together a support Hobbit deck, so you have the main Hobbit deck with Merry, Pippin, and Sam, but that access to Spirit is something you don't have with those three.
Right.
Those three. You look through and you try to figure out what cards combo with Fatty.
There are two cards, Hobbit Pipe and Smoke Rings. Now, these you say, wait a minute, Hobbit Pipe is after your threat is reduced by an event card. What do you mean it pairs with Fatty? But yeah, it does, because if you're using this ability, essentially this ability is a form of pseudo questing, because taking away threat from the quest value is mathematically the same as putting more willpower on the board. I mean, yeah, so okay, Hobbit Pipe. I'm sure you guys have it on the screen already, but it's a zero cost spirit attachment, and item pipe attached to a Hobbit character, limit 1 per character. Response: after your threat is reduced by an event card effect, exhaust Hobbit Pipe to draw a card. So okay, we're getting some card draw out of reducing our threat by any of the various event cards that let us drop our threat. That would be Elrond's Council if you've got a unique Noldor also in the mix here. Probably you have Ally Arwen if you're running a Hobbit deck, especially with Spirit Access. Galadrim's Greeting is expensive, but it's useful. Elevensies is thematic. And depending on the build, like what other heroes you have, you do have some trait related threat reduction events that are good for Sylvans or for like scouts, and was it Noble and Scout? I think was one of them. I don't know. I've got the whole list of, thanks to Hall of Beorn for the find that list of spirit or list of threat reduction events. But really the other card,
the card is Well Warned, I think is the
Well Warned. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. The other card that I think really pairs with Hobbit Pipe is also in the Black Riders box, in the same box as Fatty, is Smoke Rings. And Smoke Rings is a 2-cost spirit event with action: reduce your threat by 1 for each pipe you control. Each hero with a pipe attachment gets +1 willpower until the end of the phase. Kind of cool. So if you're playing a pipe deck, and like Fatty then feeds into that kind of a pipe deck build a little bit, and again, not your standard pipe deck. I mean, Fatty is not like, he's never going to be a staple hero. I don't know how many times we can say that, unless somebody, maybe Chris, if you're watching this, you can come up with a build that turns Fatty into a staple hero. I don't have it in me, but certainly you can build around him, and these two cards really let you take advantage of, at least let you mitigate the threat raise. And so what's cool also is that any of these spirit events, or any of these threat reduction events, will trigger Hobbit Pipe. So you don't need all of them in a deck, obviously, but what's cool is the way Hobbit Pipe is worded. I believe it can be fired by any event card that anyone plays, and that reduces threat.
I was waiting for you to come up with something, because it's like you're looking at the threat reduction coming from just access to the spirit sphere and not from Fatty himself. It's like, hey, Fatty's the spirit guy, and so let's put Hobbit Pipe and Smoke Rings, and now we can do some things with him. It's not that it's not his ability necessarily that is it's gonna outshine them all here, but
and I think it plays into using threat as another resource almost, and so learning how to gas pedal your threat in using him, it lets you. It's one of those things like I talk about sometimes about wanting to play the game a different way and having to think about the game a different way. Maybe that's a better way of saying that. The things that I really enjoy are the ones where I have to, like, Hirgon is my prime example of this. That I go, I quest successfully, I get to play a tactics ally for 1 cost less into basically in the combat. Like I get him around for combat is the effective result of that, and that is just phenomenal. It makes you do your planning phase totally differently. It makes you hang on to extra resources, but maybe not 1 extra resource, because you're like, oh, I've got a 3 cost in my hand. Well, I've got 3 resources on the table for my tactics hero. Well, I can, I can spend 1 on an attachment somewhere or something. And it's just, man, it's great. So I've had fun kind of theory crafting some things with this, and also finding what other people have done, because there's some pretty fun decks out there, which I would be glad to talk about a couple that I found. So if you search Smoking Buddies, you'll find Warden Arnor's decks, and he's got a whole bunch under that name. I don't know how to exactly say this name, but I found it a hilarious name for the deck. So the deck creator was Immoral Collar, EMORLECALLOR. No, I don't.
Right. We won't hold you to the pronunciation, ElectronJon.
Not, it's not Cinderin or Quinius, so I'm not going to fake it.
Right.
But yeah, he created something they called a functional fatty deck. Like, thank you.
Right.
But it was essentially like this exercise in bringing a deck to attack on Dol Guldur that would have no problems with unique conflicts. And there was one more, and actually we kind of touched on this earlier about the idea of using Fatty in a support deck. And actually this is what Mr. Underhill did in a thematic saga campaign fellowship. So I would just look up like thematic saga campaign would be the keywords I would use for finding this particular fellowship, but it's a Shadow of the Past fellowship that he created. And the second deck, the support deck, is Fatty Falco, which is an amazing, like, perfect thematic pairing there.
Right.
And then Galadriel, which not obviously a Hobbit. I'm scrolling through. I'm trying to see if there are any other cards that are coming to mind that might.
Well, that's what I was going to get to. Is that one of the things that we always like to talk about is like, however crazy the cards are, and is there any sort of natural pairings that end up working with Fatty other than, we can only talk about Spirit Mary for so long, and there's no other versions of Fatty out there to compare them to. So, what do you pair Fatty with in a deck if you're going to actually try to make it work? And you talked about smoke rings and pipe. And
those would be the first two that I would do.
I'd also suggest possibly out of sight with you starting at a low threat. You might be able, if you're in secrecy with Fatty, out of sight only costs you 2, and then enemies don't engage with you or attack this phase.
Right. And then I think you have to run Hobbit Sense because you probably don't have a board state good enough to engage enemies when you're doing that. At least at the beginning, regardless of who you're running with. I do like the fact that you can slot Fatty in any deck. Who is it? Glowin, right?
Yeah.
Grant. Who is the dwarf at the very beginning? Glowin. That I was like, yeah, Glowin. I love Glowin because you can put him in any deck. He's not a he's not a dwarf. He is a dwarf, but he's not part of that dwarf synergy that gets going and going and going.
Yeah.
So a lot of those Hobbit cards would go well with him, especially and then a lot of those spirit threat reduction cards, I guess. But
also in the Shadows and Take No Notice.
Right. In the Shadows card, I think is a little overrated for a Hobbit deck. Because you're already, I think what that does is in the Shadows. Is that
each enemy engage with you with a higher engagement cost than your threat.
Oh no, it's not the In the Shadows. Okay, right. Right, gets -1/-1, right?
Yeah.
That's not the one that I was thinking. I was thinking of the one that raises their engagement cost by 5.
Take No Notice.
Yeah, that's the one that I'm not as much of a fan of as a kind of a Hobbit guy. But that's a lore card. I mean, you're talking about lore card. There's not a lot of I guess spirit Hobbit cards. Maybe it's just because I don't run spirit Hobbits very often.
I mean, my key takeaway in this whole thing is that he's not Sam. He's never gonna be Sam.
Right.
But honestly, you kind of should try to get him on your table because it just would be kind of fun to see.
Yeah.
I mean, when was the last time, like anyone who's watching, when was the last time you played with Fatty?
Right. And that's the thing. Like, I was on the Facebook group and I was talking with somebody about, I think it may have been Chad, about, thematics versus gameplay, thematics versus mechanics. I'm like, I would rather play a thematic deck than a mechanic deck. Like, if I have a chance of bringing 3 Sylvans into play and trying to make that deck work versus, just some really good hero combinations, then I'd rather play the Sylvans because I appreciate the thematics and the lore and so that's where I think we go with Fatty. Is that I agree. Try to get Fatty on the board. See what you can do.
It's some combos for him if beyond his ability, but a good combo for him in with a card that you're going to use a lot in, or you would potentially want to use in a Hobbit deck, is Keep Watch, the side quest, the tactic side quest that reduces all the non-unique enemies attack by 1. And we've talked about this before, or I've talked about this before, not here. Well, we haven't talked about it before.
Right.
We've never talked before tonight, other than chats. But yeah, the game is balanced enough that a -1 is a big deal, and especially if you've got a Hobbit that can now, he can now seriously look at something that was swinging for 4 is now swinging for 3. You're not going to chump block with him, obviously, but he can suddenly, he's a much better defender without any other attachments on him, and there are other attachments you can put on him to boost his defense. So it's getting interesting. There's ultimately, it comes down to probably you can toolbox enough stuff around him to do some fun stuff.
And then do you have enough deck space to toolbox around your other 2 heroes?
Yeah. Those 2 need to the including him with Galadriel makes it she needs half the deck to herself. So
right.
But the Falco pairing is actually interesting because you think about what his ability is. You ditch him, and you reduce your starting threat by 7. Or sorry, you reduce your current threat by 7. So yeah, I can see using Fatty's ability to essentially start a quest and get you rolling, and then when your board state's set up, you hit the reset button with Falco. Essentially hit the reset button with Falco, not a full reset button like Aragorn, like lore Aragorn.
Right.
And yeah, it can get you there. I might try that actually.
Well, even if
I've got a challenge for you, John. Building a deck with just Fatty and Falco.
Oh.
So we end up with the legendary mono Fatty deck.
If Secrecy was a little more well developed, I feel like there's some real viability here. John, I do have to say that I love your voice. You have you have of the 3 most common hosts, of you, Chad, and Chris on the show. I love listening to you the most, and so to hear you say, mono Fatty like that, just I may just take that section of the recording and just insert that randomly in other episodes.
It's your new drop.
Yeah, right. Mono Fatty.
Yep. Mono Fatty.
Right. There it is. That's it. Perfect. That's good. Well, I mean, we could sit here for another hour discussing all the stuff about Fatty, but I think we should get into maybe trying to wrap up the episode and ring the guy. Grant, what do you think? Should we ring this guy?
Yeah, let's get on and do it.
Okay. So, John, you are new to Card Talk, so we have a highly arbitrary yet scientific system here. We ring people from 1 to 10, where 1 is the one card to rule them all, and 10 is the trash bin. Let me put it in the first age talk for you. So it's bike spokes. So bike spokes. Yeah. So 10 rings is bike spokes. To give you an idea, I don't think we've ever rated a card 10 rings yet. I don't know if that's foreshadowing or not. But we have had a couple of 1s. We had a unanimous 1 in Sneak Attack, and we had a unanimous 1 as Sam Gamgee hero. And we have yet to cover the whole card pool or even come close. But and then Chad, of course. Go ahead.
The closest to a 10 is 9, and that is Bilbo and Hurlwin the Fair, both rated by David.
Right.
Wow.
I gave Hurlwin a 9, and we did have Haldir come as a 1 from Chad, but I would say Iristor didn't even get a 1 from Chris. I think right. you know, that's where the scientific stuff comes in, right?
Did you even get like a number in like regular, you know, Arabic numerals, or was
Yeah.
it binary?
No, it was, I think it was like some sort of, you know, imaginary number. It was like, you know,
Just pi.
2 pi over 4 or something like that, you know, like it was in radians and not degrees. I don't know. Anyways, but that's what it is. It's a scale from 1 to 10, and because you're the guest, we'll give you the option. Do you want to go first, middle, or last?
I'll go middle.
Middle. Okay, so
actually, take it back. Where did Chad go? I watched his episode, but I forget which order he went in.
Chad went last. He wrote down his rating. What did Chris? I forget where Chris went.
I think Chris went first.
Did he go first?
Screw it. Okay, I'll go first.
Okay. Okay, not that there's any healthy competition here. Okay, so John, let me give you a proper introduction. So on a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is the one card to rule them all and 10 is the trash bin, how would you ring Fatty Boombalatti? Fatty Bulger.
Fatty Boombalatti. Oh man, this new mic doesn't have quite the proximity effect my 58 did. Okay.
Yeah.
How would I rate Fatty?
And feel free to give all sorts of description and stuff too.
6, I guess. I don't know.
6.
Like maybe 7. Like he's not in the top half. I mean, this is like there are so many other heroes and cards to use before you use Fatty. And we said this up front. This whole, you know, this has been an exercise in just falling down the vortex of like, we paid money for this card, I want to see it on the table, or I paid money for this card, I want to see it on the table, you know. So all that being said, actually, I probably, before I did this, I may have said a 10 before I dug into the, you know, what people have done with them and kind of thinking on my own about them. But yeah, I think with the if you build around them either to boost them as a defender and use them as a semi-capable defender in a Hobbit deck, or you take advantage of some of the pipe attachment and some of the threat reduction events. And so you're pseudo questing with Fatty, who doesn't really quest for much to begin with, but you're pseudo questing with Fatty, getting that threat out of the staging area, and then being able to lower your threat and get another benefit for it. Yeah, I mean, it's usable. Not going to be my first choice, but it's also not going to be like I'm going to put a Fatty deck on the table soon. I'm saying this. By the time this airs, I will have played at least one Fatty deck, and I will have won with it. So I will update. I will take and post a screenshot or something of a winning board state with a Fatty deck.
So Grant, this just means he has to come back and talk to us about his winning Fatty deck.
No, he doesn't have to come back. He's got to post the video of him playing and winning without cheating.
Right.
Oh, without cheating. Oh.
Yeah, right. You can't have a 6-hero deck like Grant was talking about.
Right. 6 heroes.
Right. Well, you can have right. Isn't now with the new cards you can have 7 heroes on your
some crazy thing? Yeah. I mean, there's Gasthalion, which
right.
That's gonna be a fun card. Anyway.
Yeah, I can't wait to get it. Anyways, so Grant, what do you think of our boy Fatty?
Unfortunately, other than the fact that he's thematically appropriate, I've got to give him an 8.
Oh, savage. All right. Still better than Hurluin, which I agree. I had to look Hurluin up. I'm like, oh yeah, that's what he does.
Unfortunately, without us playing him for very long and getting a consistent basis for anything other, but just purely on the fact of thematic, he's a thematic hobbit for what he does. I can't give him anything more than an 8. Maybe in the future, if we'll see him again, getting another version of him, then maybe I could possibly push to something else. But right now, no. David, how about you?
Oh,
1 being the best card, 1 ring to rule them all, and 10 being the bin. What would you rate them?
I'm sorry. This is I'm flying in the face of our most recent guests here, because every guest I think I ended up giving Eurostore a 7, and then I gave Haldir a 5. Like, so here I am flying in the face of all our guests here. So I am never drawn to build a Fatty deck, and that's Right. And that's part of what I think about ringing him. One of the things that I do like about him that I've said a couple of times is that he'll slot into any deck, not just a deck that's solely built for hobbits or spirit or whatever. And he does have low spirit, but he's got 2 defense and 3 hit points, and I can't see ever using him for his ability or for his stats. But because he has that versatility, I'm gonna go with a 9. You know, he gets 9 rings from me. So the only one that's ever gonna put a deck together that's gonna beat something with him is, I guess, ElectronJon here.
I guess so. Yeah, I gotta try it, man. I mean, at this point, it's like this is now my Waterloo, probably.
Yeah, right. So, now that we've crawled down this rabbit hole, right?
Yeah.
ElectronJon, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Grant and I have been looking forward to this particular episode for a long time, so we're really glad that you decided to come on.
Great, yeah, I was glad to be here, and I've enjoyed it.
And everybody, thank you so much for being such a great sport with. I can't even close the show. Grant, close the show.
Right, join us next time for the next episode of Card Talk.
Okay, I'm done. I can't even.